Welcome to VPR's U.S. Senate debate on Vermont Edition. I'm Bob Kinzel, and today we have two candidates who are seeking one of Vermont's two U.S. Senate seats. Independent candidate Bernie Sanders is running for a second term in the Senate. Prior to being elected to the Senate in 2006, Mr. Sanders served 8 terms in the U.S. House. In 1981, he was elected to the first of several terms as the mayor of Burlington. His Republican challenger is John MacGovern of Windsor. During his career, Mr. McGovern served 4 terms in the Massachusetts legislature. He's been a member of the Windsor Town Budget Committee and the town's Development Review Board. He currently serves as the president of the Hanover Institute, a group involved in alumni issues at Dartmouth College. I'd like to welcome both of you to the program. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
And I understand it's the first time that you've met in debate, so we're looking forward to this. Here's the format for today and for all of the VPR debates. In the first round, I'll ask the candidates some questions. In the second round, they'll have a chance to ask each other questions. And in our final round, we'll have questions from our listeners. If you'd like to ask a question of our candidates, email it now to vermontedition@vpr.net. That's vermontedition@vpr.net. And throughout the debate, we want our candidates to limit their answers to 60 seconds. Let's start off discussing some of the critical fiscal issues facing this country. Now, if Congress fails to act on a number of tax and budget issues in the lame duck session after the election, the tax burden on the average Vermont family will increase by several $1,000s. It's the so-called Fiscal Cliff. Here's what will happen. The so-called Bush income tax cuts will expire for everyone. The payroll tax rate will go up by 50%. The expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit will be eliminated, and child care subsidies for working families will be reduced. Now, at the same time, $110 billion in budget cuts will go into place, including big cuts in the budget of the Defense Department. Mr. Sanders, former Governor Howard Dean said last week that Democrats should not compromise on any of these issues, and it would be better to drive right over the fiscal cliff. He says it's the best way to enact meaningful cuts in defense spending. Do you agree with that approach?
Well, let me tell you what I think, and I've been involved in this issue as a member of the Budget Committee. Right now, Bob, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. Wealthiest people are doing phenomenally well while the middle class is disappearing. To my mind, the most important thing that we can do now is to make sure that we end these outrageous tax breaks that are going to the very wealthiest people in this country. And just by doing that, by not extending Bush's tax breaks to the upper 2%, people are doing really, really well. We can save $1 trillion. So deficit reduction is a major, major issue. But it has to be done by asking the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes and not simply balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor, as many of my Republican friends would want us to do. So we're going to be working very, very hard on that issue.
So it's quite possible in the lame duck session that your choice is going to be extend the Bush tax cuts for everybody or nobody. What do you do then?
Well, I think, first of all, if it is my view that absolutely you do not give another $1 trillion in tax breaks, adding to the deficit to the wealthiest people in this country who are doing phenomenally well. Now, if the Republicans insist on this and you go over the fiscal cliff, the answer is that in January, we can come back and we will come back and say, yeah, we are going to extend the tax breaks for the middle class, but we are not going to extend it for the wealthiest people. So the issue can be dealt with when Congress reconvenes in January.
So is it fair to say there is no way you're going to accept a compromise in the lame duck session that extends the Bush tax cuts for wealthy people?
I think it would be a total outrage, a disgrace, that when we have a $16 trillion national debt to give another $1 trillion in tax breaks to the people on top who are doing phenomenally well. And I hope our Republican friends are hearing what the American people are saying. And the American people are saying loud and clear that the wealthiest people in this country have got to start paying their fair share of taxes.
And you talked about the balance of new tax revenue and budget cuts. The Simpson-Bowles Commission recommended for every dollar raised in new taxes, $2.50 should be cut from the budget. Do you agree with that ratio?
In general, I don't, but it's a very broad statement. When you talk about cuts, what are you talking about? Are you talking about wasteful and unnecessary military spending, or are you talking about cutting nutrition programs for hungry kids, or are you talking about voucherizing Medicare, or are you talking about throwing children off of health insurance? So you got to be very careful about what we're referring to when we talk about cuts. But in general, I think we should go to a 50-50 ratio. I think we could take a hard look at excessive and wasteful military spending, and I think at a time when the people on top are doing phenomenally well. And by the way, Bob, when 1 out of 4 profitable corporations is paying nothing in taxes today, when we're losing $100 billion a year because the wealthy and large corporations are stashing their money on the Cayman Islands and other tax havens, I think we should do a 50-50 ratio.
Mr. McGovern, let's talk about this fiscal cliff. Would it be such a bad thing to have all these tax cuts expire and also those budget cuts go into place as a way to reduce the country's budget deficit?
Well, there are two big issues facing this country. One of them is the extraordinary, catastrophic debt that is a burden on all of us and will be a burden on our children and our grandchildren. To me, it's immoral, unethical, and it's unconscionable. The second is the deep problems in the American economy. 23 million people out of work, looking for work. The price of gasoline crushing the middle class. This economy is in shatters. And my number one priority would be to create programs, tax policies that would get the economy moving again. And it seems in that context, the last thing you want to do is raise taxes on those who have the money to create jobs, create wealth, get people working again. That would be exactly the wrong way to go, and I would not support it.
Mr. Sanders says he could not support a compromise that extends those tax cuts to wealthy people. Could you support a compromise that doesn't, that only includes tax cuts for people up to, let's say, $250,000?
The problem is not that taxes are too low in America. The problem is we're spending too much. This problem has been going on for years. We've been spending beyond our means, and unless the United States Senate and the United States Congress, representing the people of this country, can get a handle on that and start living within its means, as most families do in America, this problem will continue. It will not be solved by raising taxes. That's not a solution.
So the answer to the question of could you support a compromise that did not extend these tax cuts to folks who make more than $250,000, is it fair to say the answer is no?
The answer is you cannot get out of this problem by raising taxes on those who create wealth in this country. It is going in the wrong direction.
And how about the ratio of budget cuts to new tax revenue? Simpson-Bowles talked about 2.5 to 1. Is that a good ratio?
As I said, the big issue is we're spending more money than we're taking in. We're taking in roughly $3 trillion. We're spending $4 trillion. Every year we're spending over $1 trillion more than we're taking in. That's the problem. And the solution to that, to me, is to get the economy going again. Create growth in the economy. First of all, it takes people off of welfare back to work. They'd much prefer to be back to work. Then they start spending money, putting it back into the economy. Those businesses that are growing start putting money back into the revenues go up. And so that the cuts and reforms to entitlement programs that Mr. Sanders says you can never touch can go forward, but would be less painful and less severe while the economy is picking up. And that's the road I would travel down.
So just to be clear, are you saying that a budget deficit plan should include no new tax revenue?
I didn't say no new tax revenue. I believe strongly that getting the economy moving again will increase tax revenue. But the tax reform that is required is reform that is so-called pro-growth. And that's a shorthand for actually lowering rates. But I agree with Senator Sanders when he says it is unconscionable that you have companies like General Electric who pay no taxes. So how did that get in there? Because they had high-priced lobbyists down at the United States Senate lobbying for these loopholes. So I would take away loopholes, broaden the base, so that's taking away the loopholes, but you can then lower the rates. We now have a world economy. American corporations are competing around the world, so you have to be competitive with other countries. And that's the route I would travel, and I think it would increase revenue, not decrease it.
You're listening to VPR's U.S. Senate debate with Bernie Sanders and John MacGovern. If you've got a question for the candidates, send us an email right now at Vermont Edition @vpr.net. Let's go to question number 2. Mr. McGovern, let's talk about a program that could face some significant changes in the years ahead, and I'm now thinking about Medicare. Republican leaders in Congress want to change Medicare as we know it for people under the age of 55. Essentially, they want to create what is called a premium subsidy, or a voucher, depending on your point of view, for individuals by giving people a set amount of money and then let the person go out in the marketplace and purchase their own private insurance policy. Is this a good idea?
What I would support, first of all, is confronting the reality that in order to have Medicare for the future, you must reform it. And I regret to say that there are many political figures who, when you talk this way, say you're out to destroy Medicare, and maybe we're going to hear that later on, Mr. Sanders, I don't know. But I would say that those reforms that you've just described are going in the right direction. And so I definitely support them in their outline, and I think by many studies have shown that those reforms do help resolve some of the problems in keeping Medicare going for the future and for future generations.
Now, the Romney-Ryan plan also reduces the premium subsidy or voucher for wealthy people. Do you have any concerns that this is going to turn Medicare into a welfare-type program because wealthy people will be less invested in the future of the program?
No, I think that these kinds of reforms are probably should be, if they work in Medicare, they should be brought into other of these entitlement programs. But in each of these cases, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, the reforms have to be, for lack of a better term, I would say global. In other words, you have to have the whole, everything is on the table, and you come to an agreement where you save it. And going after one piece and talking about one piece outside of the whole global solution doesn't make sense. And it creates distortions in the argument. But everything should be on the table, and young people below the age of 55 should be given a choice. And if they choose, this support program, whatever it's called, the voucher program, then fair enough. And I believe that that's a good way to go.
Mr. Sanders, you've been a strong supporter of Medicare as we know it today. Now you've got the baby boom generation entering the program. There are questions if Medicare can absorb all these people, either without raising taxes or cutting benefits. So why not allow people under 5 to enroll in a new approach that would give them the ability to purchase their own health care policies? Not require them, but just give them the opportunity.
Okay, let me back up, if I might, comment on something that Mr. McGovern said. You asked about kind of a balanced approach to deficit reduction, tax increases and cuts. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. McGovern, you have signed on to Grover Norquist's pledge never to raise taxes, which would suggest to me that your approach to deficit reduction would only be cuts. But to answer the Medicare issue, Bob, this is what the Ryan proposal was about. It's called the voucherization of Medicare. And what it says, and it would not go into effect for 10 years, what it says is that if you are 70 years of age and you walk into the doctor's office and you're not feeling well, and the doctor says, I'm sorry, Mary, you have cancer and you're going to need extensive radiation and chemotherapy, et cetera, which is going to cost tens of thousands of bucks. What the Ryan budget does is give you an $8,000 voucher and allows you to go to a private insurance company. And I want people to be thinking, what is a private insurance company whose job in life is only to make money going to say to somebody who walks in with an $8,000 check when they need tens of thousands of dollars in treatment? They're going to give them the door. It is a disastrous idea. We are the only country in the industrialized world not to guarantee health care to all people. We spend almost twice as much. We need to move, in my view, toward a Medicare for all single-payer system.
So what do you say to those folks who argue that by giving people more control over their health care, that they'll make better and more cost-effective decisions?
Okay, here's control over your health care. Here's an $8,000 check, and you're 70 years of age and you're living on $14,000 a year. He has control over your life. And you're going to go to some private insurance company. And that private insurance company is going to say, there's the door because we lose money on you. What our job is to guarantee quality health care to all people in a cost-effective way. Private insurance companies don't do that.
My third question has to do with the Farm Bill. This country doesn't have a farm law right now. It expired on September 30th. Mr. Sanders, you voted for a bill that passed the Senate. The legislation was actually put on hold in the House of Representatives. The bill includes a new price stabilization program that encourages dairy farmers to purchase what is essentially an insurance policy if prices drop below a specific level. We've heard from a number of small dairy farmers in Vermont who say they can't afford to purchase this insurance. They're just hanging on by a thread at this point. So explain to them why this bill is the best they can get.
Well, it is not the best they can get, but it's the best that they can get given the fact that we have a lot of right-wing Republicans in the United States Senate who really don't want to do anything. And even worse, as you've indicated, we can't get anything past the House. So you have a farm bill which is close to expiration, and the House has not acted at all. In my view, what we have to do, and this bill begins to touch on that, Bob, we need for dairy. Dairy is hurting very, very badly. I'm proud that some years ago, I passed a $350 million bill to help dairy farmers in their time of need. They're in a time of need right now. What we ultimately need, in my view, and more dairy farmers in Vermont understand this, is a supply management system. We have that in terms of organic milk. We don't have it in terms of conventional milk. And that says that you begin to deal with the incredible volatility in milk prices. When milk prices go down, farmers add more cows, milk production goes up, and it only digs the hole even deeper. In this bill is the beginning of supply management, something I strongly support.
Now, this bill also cuts the food stamp program by $4 billion, and it's estimated that these cuts will affect roughly 20% of Vermont households that rely on food stamps. Some of your supporters are very disappointed that you would vote to cut this program. So explain to them why you did.
Well, I'll tell you why. The Ryan budget would cut food stamps 10 times more than that. The budget that came, if my memory is correct, that came out of the House Agricultural Budget Committee called for, I think it was a $16 billion cut. Now, I voted, and we should be clear of that. Senator Gillibrand of New York brought up an amendment not to cut food stamps, and I certainly supported that. We are in a terrible recession. People are hungry. We should not be cutting nutrition programs, and I don't want to do that. But that was the best that we can do under the circumstances we faced at that moment.
Mr. McGovern, would you have voted for the Senate Farm Bill?
No, I would not have voted for the Senate Farm Bill. I think these monstrous federal programs that purport to help people frequently make things worse. That's just the nature of a controlled, planned economy. And Mr. Sanders is very comfortable with that model. I'm not. I believe in free markets, free minds. The more freedom, the more people can keep more of their own money, the better off they will be, the better planning they'll have in their own lives. And that the more the government gets involved, generally, the more it messes things up. And this farm bill is a perfect example of that. The farm program is one of the most complex, intricate programs devised by man. Frequently, programs are counteracting against each other, paying farmers not to grow grain, paying farmers to grow grain, et cetera, et cetera. It's a monstrous bill. It's going in exactly the wrong direction, and I would propose meaningful reforms that ultimately, over a period of time, would end it.
So you would support a free market system that just says the price for milk goes wherever it goes, and you deal with it when that happens?
Well, but doesn't the same thing happen with salt? I mean, what makes milk different from anything else? Now, I'm not saying that I would vote today to end the milk price support program. I would not. But I've been going around meeting with many Vermont farmers, and half of their problems are caused by the federal government, and then on the other hand, they are receiving, in many cases, like a milk check, which they depend on. So I wouldn't want to end that overnight. But if you raise taxes on these people, if you overregulate them, if you mandate ethanol subsidies so that the price of corn goes up, which is 60% of the cost of running the farm, with the other hand, you're making it more difficult for them. And so I think it's important to try to eventually get the government get out of the farming business, and getting in there to help them in crises. Making sure there's the insurance programs that work, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, I'm opposed to that approach.
Now, in this part of the debate, the candidates have a chance to ask each other questions. Just a reminder that the questions should be short, not policy speeches. Answers should be no less than 60 seconds, rather. And a follow-up question will be allowed. So, Mr. McGovern, start us off. What's your first question for Bernie Sanders?
Mr. Sanders, I wonder if you consider the interests of small and medium-sized businesses when you vote on our behalf. You voted against protecting small family farms and businesses from the death tax, a move that will make it near impossible for Vermont families to pass their farms and small businesses on to the next generation. In addition, the National Federation of Independent Business gave you a single-digit 9% rating. So how can Vermont's small businesses believe you are fighting for them when your record shows you almost always vote against them?
Well, the National Federation of Independent Businesses is kind of an arm of the Chamber of Commerce and big money interests, so I'm not too worried about their ratings of me. But I will talk to you about the estate tax, which I understand that you want to completely repeal. The estate tax applies to the top 0.3% of our population. 99.7% of people pay nothing in estate tax. My understanding is that in the state of Vermont, we have all of 11 people who pay an estate tax. Not a whole lot of people. If you repeal the estate tax, as I understand you want to do, Mr. McGovern, you will give the wealthiest family in this country, which is the Walton family that owns Walmart, you'll give them a $30 billion, that family, a $30 billion reduction in their taxes. Meanwhile, you and your very conservative friends want to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, nutrition, and virtually every other program important to working families. Why do you think it's a good idea to give a $30 billion tax break to the wealthiest family in America, which is what repealing the estate tax would do?
I just find your whole rhetoric abhorrent and un-American. I mean, your rhetoric is all about attacking those with money.
What did I say that was inaccurate?
I didn't say it was inaccurate. I said it was abhorrent. You're attacking wealthy people as if that's by taxing them more is the solution to all our problems. I find that whole approach objectionable. For me, it's about working together, not attacking other people, getting the economy moving again, which you do by lowering tax rates, encouraging people with money to invest it, to create new jobs. Isn't that good for America?
Creating new jobs is excellent for America. We saw that movie during the Bush years when we gave huge tax breaks to the wealthy and large corporations. We ended up losing 500,000 private sector jobs. When you talk about attacking people, one second, Bob.
Yeah.
Let me talk about attacking people. You want to repeal the estate tax, $30 billion reduction in taxes for the wealthiest family in America worth $100 billion, and then you want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That, Mr. McGovern, in my view, is attacking people, the most vulnerable people in this country.
But that's simply a smear.
Well, Mr.
Explain to me why it's a smear.
No, that's a smear.
How about if we just hold on to this for a second?
Let me just finish.
You're going to have a chance.
No, you've
got a second question coming up, and you certainly can take advantage of that, Mr. McGovern.
Let me say.
So, Mr. Sanders, could we get a question from you?
I'm not trying to cut Social Security.
All right. And you can bring that up in the second question.
So don't continue saying I'm trying to cut Social Security.
Let me ask you, we'll deal with Social Security in a moment, I hope. But let me ask you another question on another subject, if that's okay, Bob. Mr. McGovern, the recently passed Republican Party platform in Tampa asked for a constitutional amendment to deny all women in this country, under all circumstances, including rape, incest, or the life of the mother, to deny them the right to terminate a pregnancy. Do you believe that a woman should be forced by the government to give birth to a rapist baby against her will?
I've always in my career and to this day been loyal to the principle of life. I'm pro-life. I'm profoundly pro-life. I'm pro-life to my core. The people who raise these issues, people like you, Mr. Sanders, are usually raising it because you're uncomfortable. It's a smokescreen to hide behind when the economy is tanking, when 23 million people are out of work, when the $16 trillion debt. And so that's the last thing you want to talk about. You want to be talking about this so-called Republican war on women. To me, the war on women is taking place, and it's to the women who have to go to their gas tank, to fill up a gas tank.
Mr. McGovern, you didn't answer my question. Well, it was a simple question.
We have to give him his full
You
time.
asked the question, and I'm answering it.
Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Sanders?
Do you believe that if a woman is attacked and raped, she should be forced by the government to have that baby?
I would vote for the Hyde Amendment. Did you vote for the Hyde Amendment? No. The Hyde Amendment says that people's tax dollars should not be used to fund abortion. And there is an exception in that, as I recall, for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. So that tells you what I would do in public policy.
It doesn't.
It does.
Okay. Well,
it does. I'm not going to be going down to Washington, if elected, to pass laws on abortion.
Well, you will be voting on issues like whether or not you continue the funding of Planned Parenthood. Do you think we should continue funding Planned Parenthood?
No, I do not. We don't. The test I have for all these programs is this program worth continuing and borrowing money from the Chinese to pay for it? There is no money, Mr. Sanders. You've spent it all. You're spending more money than we're taking in, and you're putting that bill on our children and grandchildren. And if you're proud of that, well, I wonder how the people of Vermont believe.
Mr. McGovern, let's get a second question from you.
Okay. Bernie, I don't think you're being honest with the good people of Vermont. You claim to be an independent. You have the word independent next to your name. There's no independent party in Vermont, but you have that next to your name. You have a voting record that clearly indicates that you're in the back pocket of Harry Reid. 98% voting record with the Democrats, 90% I saw in the Washington Post. My question to you is, well, a good example of it was that bill that Ron Paul had on auditing the Fed, and he trusted you to carry that bill to the Senate, and you voted to gut your own bill because Harry Reid wanted it gutted and the Obama administration wanted it gutted. So how do you justify saying one thing and doing another?
Mr. McGovern, as you may or may not know, I am the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States Congress, and I'm very proud that the people of Vermont have given me that honor. To be an independent does not mean simply to be in the middle of the Democratic and Republican parties. I think, sadly and tragically, the Republican Party of George Aiken and Bob Stafford and Jim Jeffords, Dean Davis, Dick Stelling, has been moved nationally to a right-wing extremist party. I think that, sadly, the Democratic Party has become too conservative. So do I caucus with the Democratic Party? Hey, no great secret about that. Am I supporting Barack Obama for president? No great secret about that. Have I been more critical of Barack Obama for not standing up to Wall Street and protecting working families more vigorously than any other person in the Democratic caucus? Yeah, I think that's also true. So I am proud to be an independent and to stand with working families in this state, in this country, against the dominance of big money interest over both political parties.
Well, I think that, as I said, that you're not independent when it comes to your votes. Your votes are overwhelmingly with the Democratic leadership. Can you recall one vote where the Democratic leadership needed your vote and you didn't vote with them? I mean, they may be there, but it seems to me that when he needs your vote, you're there for Harry Reid. And that, you can talk about being independent, but it's the votes that count. And you can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? And that's my question.
If your question is, do I side far more with the Democrats than right-wing Republicans, the answer is absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely yes. You're quite right. To my mind, while the Democrats are not as strong as they should be on taking on Wall Street, on taking on corporate America in general, on fighting for a fair tax policy, there is no question in my mind that Obama is far superior to Romney. Democrats in the Senate are far more superior on these issues than the Republicans. So that's where I am.
All right. We have a second question from Mr. Sanders for Mr. McGovern.
Let me ask you a question on health care. 50 million people in this country today, Mr. McGovern, have no health insurance. Many more are underinsured. Many people listening to this program have $5,000 deductibles, high co-payments. About 45,000 people, according to a study at Harvard a couple of years ago, die each year because they don't get to a doctor when they should. And yet, you want to end Medicare as we know it. You said that the Ryan budget was too timid. I think that was the word that you used. Is that correct? You did say that. So the Ryan budget cuts Medicaid by $770 billion over a 10-year period. Now, my question is, have you calculated how many more people will die if we convert Medicare into a voucher program, throw 14 million people off of Medicaid? What happens to working people who have no health insurance when they get sick?
There are a couple of points I'd like to make. One is the reforms that I'm talking about and that Paul Ryan is talking about and Mitt Romney is talking about and Alice Rivlin was talking about and Ron Wyden in the Senate were talking about are reforms to save these programs, not to gut them and not to do away with them. If we continue on the path that you are on, these programs will cease to exist. They will go bankrupt. And how is that good for the people you claim to represent and to love and to foster? Second, I do believe that in general, the free markets and free minds have created more wealth for more people than any other system devised by man in the history of the world. I know you were a socialist. I don't know if you still are a member of the Socialist Party, and that maybe you're not, but a lot of your rhetoric sounds just like it. It's about that the state makes things better.
Well,
government programs make it better.
Let me just get back. I think your time has expired, sir.
Well, but you're not the moderator. So
your time has expired. But let's a little back and forth is fine.
All right, let me just ask you this. If I could ask you to answer my question. If there's a worker in the state of Vermont, makes $12 an hour, you support the Ryan budget, which would slash Medicaid, throw millions of people off of health insurance. What does a worker making $12, $14, $15 an hour do to get health insurance if Medicaid is cut?
Medicaid will cease to exist if we follow down your road, so that person won't have Medicaid. What Paul Ryan is talking about...
That's not true, of course.
Well, if it doesn't exist, how are they helped?
Well, I think there are ways. I know you don't believe in asking the wealthy to pay more in taxes.
No,
there are ways to raise revenue to maintain health insurance for our people.
I believe in free markets and free minds. I believe that many of these problems that we discuss, where insurance rates go up and people can't afford them, are created by people like you. They're created by politicians who are mandating coverage for certain programs. And so mandating that you can't buy insurance across state lines. You're shackling the insurance companies, making it difficult for them to create profits and to keep going. And then you say, well, there are these bad guys, and so we need the government program to fix it. We need the government program because you've messed up the free market system in many cases.
We've gotten a lot of email from our listeners, so let's see if we can buzz through a lot of these questions in the time that's remaining. Pike submitted this question. Senator Sanders, he wants to know, why do you continue to support federal funding of the F-35, and why do you support the bed down of these planes at the Burlington Airport?
Well, for two reasons. I believe in the National Guard. I think the National Guard has done an extraordinary job over the years. And I would answer that in two respects. Number one, if the F-35 did not come to Burlington, I can tell you absolutely that the people in Florida and South Carolina would love that plane. So if it's not a question of whether the F-35 was going to be here or not. The F-35 is going to be the state-of-the-art fighter jet for the United States and NATO allies. That's a reality, number one. Number two, the real issue is how we mitigate the noise problem, which is, in fact, a serious environmental issue. We're working with Tom Drew. We work with the National Guard in general to make sure that we do everything that we can to mitigate noise and deal with the environmental issues of the F-35.
Mr. McGovern, what's your thought on this subject?
Well, I've tried to get a handle on it. I've met with members of the community in South Burlington, and I've met with the representatives of the National Guard. I think it's a tricky situation. I have not made a decision as to how I would what position I would take, but I think to me, the defense budget is not a work program. In other words, the argument that it's for jobs alone is not compelling to me if it's not in the right place. The second issue that I don't have fully resolved is the issue of our national security, which to me trumps all others. In other words, if that is an important part of the national defense of this country, and that argument has been given at some points, that would be an important one. And so what was the final? The final point is I'm still looking at the facts. I want to know what impact it is on the housing ability of people to sell their homes in the area. And finally, I would say that if I were putting in a fighter jet airport, I don't think, from scratch, I don't think I would put it there.
If I can just very briefly, Mr. McGovern is right. The Defense Department should not be a job program, and I think, in fact, at $700 billion, we can probably make some good cuts there, judicious cuts there. But the issue is, really, it will be a jobs program either in Burlington or South Carolina or in Florida. And given that reality, I'd rather have the jobs in Vermont.
Mr. McGovern, Jim in Colchester has this question. He wants to know if we could have a new military strategy so that we can maintain security while reducing military costs. Should any of the over 800 U.S. military bases throughout the world be closed? If so, where?
Well, I don't have the answer to that question, but I would say that clearly cuts can be made in the defense budget, ought to be made in the defense budget. But we must remember that when serving in the United States Senate or running for the United States Senate, you're running for a federal office. And one of the responsibilities of the federal government is national defense. So I think the defense budget is not, I would not put the defense budget in the same basket as all the other programs. That's a high priority. But clearly it can be cut. Second is the issue of foreign bases. I have friends who are very, very high up in the Defense Department, and many of those people believe that bases should be shut here in America, but our foreign presence should be beefed up. So we need to get, so clearly cuts can be made, but I don't know if it's wise for us to be cutting foreign bases. Maybe we should shut some of them here at home.
Mr. Sanders?
I look at it a little bit differently. We have tripled military spending since 1997. We're now spending almost as much as the rest of the world combined. In terms of percentage of our GDP, we spend about twice as much as our NATO allies who provide health care to all of their people as a right and more or less free college education as well. I am on board a letter which asks for a thorough review of the military bases that we do have defending Europe, which in many ways now is better able to defend itself and wealthier in many respects than we are. So I do think we have to take a hard look at the military bases we have abroad.
Richard has a question about Social Security. We're going to expand it out a little bit, and this really is pretty simple answers here, yes or no. Mr. McGovern, would you raise the eligibility age for Social Security as part of the overall solution to this problem?
As I said from the outset, at the very beginning, everything should be on the table, but you don't just take one solution at a time. There's a global solution to this, and that should be included as one of the things that in the negotiating you work out.
Some people think that wealthy people shouldn't get Social Security. Agree or disagree?
Well, the issue is trying to save Social Security for the future. And if there's a lot more that has to be done to do that, tweaking alone will not do it. But could that be part of it? Yes. But all these things, it's a negotiating business, and people meet around the table, and you give and you take, and that clearly could be part of that. So if it brings us to the solution to save Social Security, the answer is yes.
How about allowing younger people to create their own private retirement accounts using their payroll tax payments?
Absolutely, that should be on the table as one of the things considered. And again, I would make it more like the proposal of Mitt Romney, in which case it's an option available, so that the young person could choose either to have what they're getting now or to have a private account.
Mr. Sanders, same three questions for you. How about raising the age of eligibility?
Well, Bob, as the chairman of the Senate Defending Social Security Caucus, let me just say a few things. Number one, Social Security hasn't contributed a nickel to the deficit. Number two, the Social Security has a $2.7 trillion surplus, can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 21 years. And thirdly, Social Security has been an enormously successful program in lowering poverty among seniors, helping people with disabilities and widows and orphans. My view is, and this is what Obama said 4 years ago, and we're trying to get him to say it again, that if you want to make Social Security solvent, not for 21 years, but for 75 years, is what actuaries want. What you want to do is raise the cap on upper income people. It's now at $110,000. If you simply start at $250,000 and then lift the cap so that millionaires start paying their fair share into the system, Social Security will be able to pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 75 years.
So let's have a wrap-up question for both of you today. Right now, Congress has one of its lowest approval ratings. Something like 10% of the American people think Congress is doing a good job. Some people think this development threatens the future of our democratic form of government. If you're elected, what specific steps will you take to end the gridlock that has taken hold in Washington? Mr. Sanders?
I think the great crisis that we face is that Washington ends up representing big campaign contributions, big campaign contributors, and the disastrous Citizens United decision has allowed people like the Koch brothers to spend an estimated $400 million on this campaign. I think that's just totally absurd. And I think the reason why so many people are angry at Congress is that day after day what they see is a Congress working on behalf of millionaires and billionaires and not the middle class or working families or lower income people, the vast majority of the people. So to answer your question, the direction that we have got to go is make sure that Congress works for ordinary people. Ordinary people do not want to see Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid cut. Ordinary people do want to see the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. They do want to see us deal with this growing wealth and income inequality in America. And when Congress begins to stand up for ordinary people, I suspect strongly that its approval rating will go up.
Mr. McGovern.
Well, I think we start with getting the economy going again and focusing on solving the problems that most representatives of the American people agree exist. One, we're spending beyond our means. And I think though there are issues that divide us, divide many Americans, there are those that we can find common ground, and that's what I would try to do in Washington. And I don't think you get to that point by name-calling and attacking other people and labeling them and stirring up the pot, the politics of jealousy and envy. In my book, those are all vices. I mean, they're not things you encourage in other people. They're things you try to stamp out. And my program would be to invoke I think it comes from the phrase of the inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln, to invoke the quote-unquote better angels of our nature. I think that is the way to go, and that's to bring people together and to start to solve these problems and stop the attack.
You've been listening to the VPR U.S. Senate debate. Many thanks to our candidates today, Independent Bernie Sanders and Republican John MacGovern. Thanks for being on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Next week, our debate series continues. On Wednesday, we'll have the major party candidates for auditor. And a week from today, the candidates for attorney general will discuss the issues in their race. Vermont Edition is produced by Patty Daniels, Rick Singari, and Sage Van Wang. We had production assistance from Tim Johnson. Peter Biello directed the show. Our executive producer is John Van Hoosen. I'm Bob Kinzel. Have a great weekend.